So now let us start. The first topic that we would like to discuss, this is the description of the Garden of Eden. And as I already mentioned, the Garden of Eden is described as a sanctuary. And how can we know that the Garden of Eden is described as the sanctuary? There are many factors that points to this direction, that it is not just a place for living or something like that, but it is more than this. There is an emerging consensus among the biblical scholars that the pre-fall Garden of Eden is to be regarded as the original sanctuary on earth, a copy of the sanctuary temple in heaven. Of course, maybe I will not agree completely with this quotation. Maybe it's not a copy, but it was a real sanctuary. And when we read the book of Genesis, like, for example, 28 chapter of the book of Genesis, we can see that actually the heavenly temple is portrayed as a movable temple. So it is not a stationary temple somewhere in heaven, but it can move in space, according to our earthly understanding. So how can we know that the garden is a sanctuary? For example, the same Hebrew verbal form, hitpael, used for God's walking back and forth in garden, and it describes God's presence in the tabernacle, like, for example, in Leviticus 26, Deuteronomy 23, and so on and so forth. So it indicates that actually God is present in the Garden of Eden in the same way as he was present in the sanctuary. Another thing that we also mentioned yesterday when we spoke about the Sabbath and about the occupation of people, Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. So we can see that they were supposed to walk and to keep it. And for example, if we read Numbers chapter 3, verses 7 to 8, we can see that this was exactly the function of the Levites in the tabernacle. So they had to perform a service in the tabernacle, and it is described as the word avad, to walk. And they also had to keep it. And to keep it means it's a Hebrew word shamar, to keep or protect it from the penetration of somebody else who is not authorized to enter the tabernacle. So what else? Yes.
In there, I think Adam till that time was alone in the garden.
What do you mean alone?
He, yes, he was with his wife only, I think. Then who was supposed to come in the garden, and yet was not another people on the earth.
Yes, it's a good question. It is a good question. Of course, usually when we have such kind of questions, I can tell you that, do you see, when the Bible doesn't tell us exactly, we cannot be very sure. But who knows, maybe even at the presence of Satan, when he came through the image of a serpent, maybe the task of Adam was to protect from anybody who is outsider. So we do not know exactly, but later on you will see that this role of protecting the Garden of Eden is given to cherub. When Adam is driven away from the garden, so the cherub was was put at his place, and he protects the entrance to the Garden of Eden, so that people cannot get in anymore. So we don't know from whom he should protect the garden, but anyway, so it is written that he should minister or walk in garden, and he should shamar, and shamar means to protect or to keep. Okay, so what are the references we can find which tells us that the Garden of Eden was the sanctuary. The Tree of Life was probably the model for the lampstand placed directly outside the Holy of Holies. The lampstand looked like a small flowering tree with 7 protruding branches from a central trunk, 3 on one side and 3 on the other, and one branch going straight up from the trunk in the middle, on which see the further references. Oh yeah, it's just the quotation from one book. Just as a river flowed out from Eden, so the eschatological temple in both Ezekiel and Revelation has a river flowing out from its center. So it's also one feature that tells us that Garden of Eden was a sanctuary. Like the tabernacle, the garden is oriented eastward, and those who were to pitch before the Mishkan eastward, before the tent of meeting, toward the sunrise. So the cherub appear only in the context of both sanctuaries, so the tabernacle and temple and the Garden of Eden. The Lord's creation of cosmos is divided into 7 days that are each introduced with the expression, and God said. The instruction for constructing the tabernacle are divided into 7 speeches, and each speech is introduced by, and the Lord spoke. So very, very similar construction. So it also tells us that the Garden of Eden is portrayed as a sanctuary. What is important, this is in Genesis 13:10, that later on we can see that the land of Canaan is also portrayed as a symbol for the Garden of Eden. And we can find several examples that indicate this. For example, at Genesis 13 and verse 10, and Lot lifted up his eyes and saw that the Jordan Valley was well watered everywhere, like the garden of the Lord. So do you see, it is compared here, the Jordan Valley or the promised land is compared to the garden of the Lord. Furthermore, we can find even more interesting detail. If we open Genesis 15 and verse 18, we can see the borders of the Garden of Eden. And the borders of the Garden of Eden, at least some of them, are very similar to the borders of the Promised Land, and the Garden of Eden have the same borders. Like, do you see, on that day, the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, to your offspring I give this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river, the river Euphrates. And if you open chapter 2 of Genesis, we can see that here the same rivers we can find. We can find the river Euphrates and also the river which is flowing through the land of Cush. And the land of Cush is ancient name for Ethiopia, and actually it is very similar to the river of Egypt. So we can see that later on Canaan became a symbol of a Garden of Eden. And here, especially when we speak about Genesis 8:15, we can find one interesting detail. So when God promised Abraham to give him the promised land, to give Canaan, in this promise we can see like a double fulfillment. On the first hand, it is clear that he promised just a literal land. So the descendants of Abraham will come back and they will live in this land. But on the other hand, we can see that Canaan as a symbol of Eden, and in this case, we can understand that God promised Abraham not only to give his descendants this land, but to return him to the Garden of Eden. And we will speak about it a little bit later when we will speak about the promises and the blessings of the patriarchs. So this is the Genesis 2, and this is the description of these two rivers. So one river that is coming through the land of Cush, and it's very similar to the river of Egypt. And the fourth river is the river Euphrates. Okay, Pastor Michel asked a question. I will answer his question later, okay? So let's continue. Do you have any questions so far?
Thank you.
Yes, Prof.
Yes, please.
Mine is concerning
Yes.
the Garden of Heaven that reflects the sanctuary. So I want them to know exactly whether the glory which will now forth in the Garden of Eden, if we can go around like the river Hippolyte, we can really rejoice or even have such kind of glory in this today.
Again, please repeat your question.
I've found that the God of Eden was within a piece of land that Adam and Eve were given. And therefore, there was a glory of God in such garden. And we can see the river Euphrates was passing beside this garden. Is it possible that nowadays we can
find
that
this location
can be filled?
Yeah. So it's impossible. It's completely impossible. Only the land of Israel today, it's like a symbol of the Garden of Eden. But of course, we cannot find the place which is described in the book of Genesis. And even do you see the description of the Garden of Eden is something that we cannot even imagine. So the Bible says that there was one river that flowed out of Eden, and it was divided into 4 rivers. And one of those rivers was the river Euphrates. Another river is a river from the land of Cush, and so on and so forth. One more river is Tigris, which flows east of Assyria. So do you see there were rivers, and one river is Gihon. So those rivers in our modern geography are very distant from each other. They do not have one source or one stream which is divided into some of them. So that is why I think it is just impossible to find this place. And we know from from Ellen G. White, when she says that actually the Garden of Eden was at our earth until the flood, but after the flood, before the flood, it was removed, and and Adam and Eve, when they worshiped God at the entrance of the Garden of Eden. But later on, this place was removed. And after that, when we read chapter 10 of the book of Genesis, we can see that the land was also divided. Because when we look at the geography, the first geography, how everything was created. So it looks like it was one piece of land. But later that was surrounded by oceans or by seas. But later on in chapter 10, we can see that the land was divided in chapter 10. So the geography now and then is different. There are 2 different geographies. So we cannot find any correspondence between them. Okay?
Thank you very much.
So also, how do we know that Canaan was a symbol of Eden? One interesting detail we can find in chapter 32, when Angel of the book of Genesis, when Jacob is coming back from Laban to the promised land, so he encountered an angel. And it looks like this angel doesn't allow Jacob to enter the promised land. And it is the same as it was with the Garden of Eden, because there was a cherub who was standing at the border of the Garden of Eden, and he didn't allow anybody to enter. And what is interesting, Jacob, which actually means the liar or person who is very, very tricky. So Jacob cannot enter the promised land, but after his name is changed, he is able to enter the promised land. So it looks like here we have also a symbolism when again Canaan is portrayed as a symbol of the Garden of Eden. Okay, so now let's go to this section. Or if you have any other questions, so you can ask and we can speak about that. Okay, if there is no questions, let us proceed to the fall and the consequences of the fall. And first of all, let us speak about the temptation. When we speak about the temptation, very often there is a question, so what was the temptation? And why did Eve so easily tempted by the Satan in the form of the serpent? And the first thing that we need to discuss is that Satan, when he tempted Eve, he proposed her, or he promised her, that she will be like God. And there is an irony here, because actually Adam and Eve shouldn't do anything to become or to be like God, because according to chapter 1 of the book of Genesis, we can see that Adam and Eve were created in the image and likeness of God. So Adam and Eve already were like God. And here we can see just an irony. One more thing that I would like to discuss is, it's just a hint. We cannot say anything we cannot be dogmatic here. But the translation of this verse could be different. Here, the Hebrew verb haya is used, and you remember that this verb haya could be translated either like to be, or either as to become. So usually all the translation translated like this: behold, the man has become like one of us in knowing good and evil. Now lest he reach out his hand and take also of the tree of life and eat and live forever. But this word verb become could be also translated as to be, and in the past it would be was. So in this case, we can translate this verse as, behold, the man was like one of us in knowing good and evil. Now, lest he reach out his hand and take also the tree of life. So in this case, do you see, of course, I don't want to say that we need to subscribe to this translation, but I just want to tell you that this is possible. Yes, Pastor Dion, I see that you raised your hand.
Good morning, Professor. Yes, I was just about the question, why was it that Eve was so easily tempted? I think one of the things is that in John 8:44, we read where Jesus speaks to the Pharisees, and he says that they are like their father, and that he is the father, speaking about Satan, he is the father of the lie, which is singular, and the lie is that God is not truthful and loving. And when Eve was tempted with a lie, she has never come across lies before, never came across deceptions before, and I think that is why she was that easily deceived. What is interesting that you just mentioned is that there's a couple of lies that came out here, but it all comes down to one thing, and that God cannot be trusted. He doesn't want to have other people to be like him. He's not loving. He didn't make people according to his image, so they will live forever. So there's a couple of these lies that he spoke, and he spoke after that many other lies. But if we want to summarize that into say that he's the father of the lie, singular, what would you say is that lie?
Oh, very interesting. So what is your opinion? What do you think about it?
I think it's about
Pardon?
God being merciful and loving, because
The
when
lie
Jesus
about the
came,
character of
he
God.
came to show us one character. Yes, the character of God. Because when Jesus came, he did not have anything but one thing, and that is the character of God. He didn't have wealth, he didn't have status, he didn't have family. He only had one thing, and that was he didn't even have looks. He only had one thing, and that is the character of God. And I think that character, if we have to look at his character, one thing that stands out is his love and mercy specifically. And I think that is the lie would be that he came to work against the lie. And I think the lie is that God is merciful.
Okay, I see that some other people also raised hands. Please, Pastor Landiela.
Yes, Prof. My concern is about the use of the term become in the translation. Why did the translator choose become instead of was? Because you know, if we use the word become, it seems like the lie of Satan was true. So maybe about the, I'm asking about the, you know, Prof, the Hebrew word. So why is it become, not was?
Yeah, do you see most probably most of the translators translate it like this, because the text says, behold, the man has become like one of us in knowing good and evil. So it looks like God says that man become, so man now knows evil as well as he knows good. And it was not before the fall. So that is why most of the translators translate it as become. But I'm just curious, is it possible to translate it as was from the context, like, behold, the man has, or behold, the man was like one of us. And here, in knowing good and evil, it looks like they already knew evil before the fall. So that is why maybe one thing that disturbs the translators, and they prefer to use the word become instead of the verb was or to be.
But
I don't know
Prof,
which translation is better. So
yeah.
because do you see, we need to explain this phrase in knowing good and evil in order to make it worse.
Yeah, but Prof, when we say they didn't know evil, I think before the fall, I think in the, you know, in the spirit of prophecy in patriarch and prophets, it says that that the angels already warned them. I mean the meaning of the word to know evil. It's not really about doing evil, but they are already aware about the existence of the evil. Isn't it true? Or
yeah, maybe we can say like this. Yeah. Okay, Pastor.
Okay.
Pastor Posla.
Oh, is Pastor Landiela done? Okay. Yeah, I also was more favorable for was, but I don't know how to fit it with that part. It says
Yes.
in knowing good and evil. So I was trying to look at the construction in the Hebrew,
Okay, try to do
see
this.
how it would
Maybe
read.
we can play around with this construction, and another meaning would be more, how to say, illustrative or more.
Yeah, yeah. But it
Clear.
might take time. But I think that's a project to look at that.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
for me, this verse has always been confusing for the very reason that Pastor Landiela was mentioning, that it seems to be confirming what the serpent was saying, that they will be like God, knowing good and evil. And now God himself is saying, now they've become like one of us in knowing good and evil. So that's the challenge that I've been having. Unless knowing good and evil here is, knowing can also is sometimes used in terms of intimate knowledge or experience with something. Not that God, of course, knows evil by experience, but because when sin came into the universe in heaven, they had an experience with evil and what evil can do. And the
Yes,
bad
a good idea.
that evil can do. So because man now has this experience with evil, he cannot eat of the garden and live forever in that state. That's how I reconcile it in my mind, but I want to be faithful to the grammar as well.
Or maybe you can write a paper on it. And one more thing that you need that we need to think about. So do you remember yesterday we spoke about the expression heaven and earth, and we said that it could be that heaven and earth actually means it is a merism, and if it is a merism, so it means everything. Yes, heaven and earth.
Oh. Okay.
So what about the expression good and evil? Can we also interpret it as a merism? And if it is a merism, so what does it mean in this case?
Everything, every knowledge.
Oh yeah, every knowledge, yeah. Every knowledge is. So do you see? So there are some tricky issues with the understanding of those texts.
Yeah, maybe it would be good material for a research paper.
Yeah.
Now I'm interested. Okay, thank you, Prof.
Okay, so let us move on.
A little bit, please.
Yes, please.
Can we say that Satan talked the truth in this statement?
Yeah, do you see when Satan speaks, he doesn't speak in a lie.
Pure lies.
Yeah, but he mixes lie and truth together. And in this case, it's very difficult to discern between the truth and between a lie. So, and I think it is his strategy. So even do you see when he approaches Eve, he doesn't say anything. He only just asks questions in the beginning. Is it true? Is it true? And Eve responds to all his questions. And after that, he says, no, you will not die. And of course, it is a lie. Because in the previous chapter, it is clearly stated that in the day when you eat from the fruit, you will die. But he says, no, you will not die. But God knows that at the moment when you eat from the fruit, you will be like gods. You will be like gods. Okay? And here, I think if we understand this, become not, if we translate it not as become, but if you translate it as was, so in this case, we can say that actually Satan was a liar. So he deceived Adam and Eve in everything. So yeah, this is a tricky question. It is very, very tricky question. It's not so easy to give the answer to this question. Okay, let us continue. And next one, yes. One more thing that I would like us to pay attention to is the choice of the words in this verse. So when the woman saw that the tree was good for food and that it was a delight for the eyes, so he took it and ate. So pay attention to these two words, so and good. So where, in what other places of the Bible we can find these two words together?
It's in the creation account.
Yes, in the first chapter of the book of Genesis, when God saw that something was good. And here some scholars say that this is actually was the first sin of Eve, because do you see what she did? Before, in chapter 1, the only person who can make a judgment what is good and what is not good was God himself. And now it looks like Eve takes this right to judge what is good and what is not good. And later on we will see that this sin is repeated, especially in the book of Genesis, many times. So every time when you find the verb to see in the book of Genesis, be very careful, because most probably after this verb to see, there will be a description of something bad or some sin should happen. For example, it seems, is it here? Yes, so Eve's action, and woman saw that the tree is good, and God's action, and God saw that, for example, light is good. So do you see, very similar? So she takes the right of God to judge what is good and what is not good. So look, the same construction we can find in Genesis chapter 6 and verse 2. And the sons of God saw the daughters of man, that they are good. So in most of the translation, this good is translated as they were beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
But do you see the original phrase there is tov? So they saw that they are good, and they took it. So, and the verbs which are used here are the same as the verbs which are used in Genesis 3. So they saw that they are good and they took. Lakach, Ra'ah, Tov, and Lakach. So the same lexica is used. And with this manner, the author of the book of Genesis shows us that actually the action of those sons of God, this action was the same as the action of Eve, who committed a sin. So it is like a hint that these sons of God also committed a sin when they decided who is good and who is not good. But when they married the daughters of man. Okay, let's go back. So when Eve decides what is good and what is not good, she actually takes the prerogative of God to make a judgment. And I think that in our modern days, many people repeat the same actually mistake. So in our days, many people decide what is good for them. So they don't rely upon the word of God to understand what is good and what is not good, but they try themselves make a decision what is good. And there are many examples, like, for example, our problems with the LGBT movement. So why it happened? Because people today decide that actually it is good. So they say it is not bad, although in the Bible it says that it is bad. But people in our days themselves decide what is good for them. Okay, Pastor Dion.
Yes, Professor. I was just looking in the word in Afrikaans and translating it to English. And in English, there's a word called pedantry, which is pedantic, to always think that you know better. And I think that is what that the sin was Eve was pedantic. She was thinking that she knows better than God.
Yeah,
And
correct.
yeah.
She knows better than God knows. Yeah. So, and in our days, many people do like this. When, for example, they know that the Bible says that it is sin, but they decide for themselves that it is better for them. Or when they try to make a shortcut, and this shortcut usually brings to some bad consequences. In chat. In chat, there is a, okay. Could you please
responded.
It is in Afrikaans, yeah?
No, that is the English word. It's the same as pedantic, but the action of being pedantic is called pedantry.
Prof,
Yes.
I had my hand up. I just wanted to. This is very powerful because the temptation of the devil was for Eve to be like God, knowing good and evil. And now God had told them what is good, that is eating from the tree, and what was not good, not eating from the tree. So if you eat from the tree, it's good, you'll be fine. I mean, if you don't eat from the tree, you'll be fine. But if you eat from the tree, it will be evil. The result will be you will surely die. And so the devil says, you shall not surely die. So now she takes the place of God in deciding what is good or bad for her. And the reason why she eats is because she saw that it is good. So she took, I'm agreeing with what you're saying. It's as if she took the place of God in deciding what is good or bad for her. Therefore, the action was following that mindset that I can decide for myself what is good in spite of what God has said.
Thank you. And now, after they committed this first sin, Adam and Eve, so we can see that they were hiding from God. And this sin of hiding from God could be a prototype of many other subsequent sins described in the Bible. And especially we can find a parallel when God proclaimed the Ten Commandments, and people again were hiding from God. People heard the voice of the Lord and they responded in the same way as Adam. So they say, I don't want to speak. They don't want to speak to God, but they were afraid of speaking to God. And later on, we will find some other issues related to this. And now I would like us to think a little bit about the punishment that God provided for Adam and Eve. So what was the punishment? This chapter 3, it's a very famous chapter. We will not touch now the punishment for the serpent, but let us pay attention to the punishment for the people. So what was the punishment for Eve? She, and like every woman
Pain
in this
conception
world,
and childbirth.
Yeah, so she need to, now she have to bring, bear the child with the pain, yes? And what is the punishment for the man?
Eating from the sweat of his brow, the land would be hard to
Yes,
terms
he
of
had to
production.
toil. He had to toil the
Toil.
land, and it will be hard now. So usually, people understand this as a punishment, or people understand it as a curse. But in fact, it is not a curse, because we know that the Adam was not cursed because of his sin. Only the land was cursed. But I would like to say something even more. So I would like to say that actually it was not a punishment at all, but it is a kind of a blessing. So what do I mean? So let us remember, when God created people, he blessed them immediately. So what was this blessing about? Let us open chapter 1 of the book of Genesis. So be fruitful and
Yes, and
multiply. Fill the
multiply.
earth and subdue it. So we can see here like two components of the blessing. The first one is be fruitful and multiply. And the second one is subdue, or exercise dominion over the land, subdue the land. Okay? So now what we can see in this sentence for the people. So the blessing was be fruitful and multiply, and now he says, I will surely multiply your pain in childbearing. In pain you shall bring forth children. So, but do you see the main idea of this sentence is that this original blessing, be fruitful and multiplied, is still there. So God didn't remove the original blessing from the people, but he only added and said, okay, I said that you will be fruitful and you will multiply, and it will be like this. But the only problem that now the childbearing, this process of multiplication, will be accompanied with the pain. So it will be a pain in this process. But we can understand it not only as a punishment, but as a confirmation of the original blessing. Okay? So it's not only the punishment, but it is also a confirmation of the original blessing. And the same we can say about Adam. So because before it was said that he could freely eat, the earth was very good. Now the earth is cursed, and in pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. But anyway, Adam should exercise the dominion over the land. So do we have the next slide? I don't remember. Yeah, so it means that God didn't remove the original blessing from the people. They can still multiply, they can still subdue the land, but all these processes will be accompanied by pain. It will be not easy as it is supposed to be. And it means that God's sentence is a kind of confirmation of the original blessing, but because of the sin, those blessings are changed. So they are marred with this pain and this problem. Yeah, I see like 2 hands are raised up. So please, if you want to say anything, feel free to do it.
My opinion about the punishment, I don't know what I can drive it, but sometimes, as you have said, it's about the blessings. But I am trying to think about these blessings, which is confined by the pain. And in fact, is that we know is the human being who sin, and therefore the punishment was driven into him. What about the animals? Because also when the experiencing such kind of the labor, and them, yeah, in their case, they do not even fall, or even they don't sin. How can you comment about that?
Yeah, this is the good question. And the good question is, how can we understand who the animals are? So why do we have animals on our planet? Why did God create animals in the Garden of Eden? So what was the purpose of the animals? How do you understand it?
It was for men, like you said, Prof, earlier.
Yes, everything was
that
for
what
men.
God was creating everything for men, and man becomes a crowning act and is given dominion not over only the earth, but also over the animals. So even now, governing the animals becomes hard for men. It's not only the earth that is cursed, but there are animals that are not so easy to govern now after the fall.
Yeah.
Like the lions and everything. So we see that sin does not only affect the head, which is humanity, but everything else that is under him and under his.
So, and remember how the animals were created. So do you remember how the animals were created?
God spoke.
Okay, God spoke, and
according to their species, and they had to multiply within those species.
No, let's read Genesis 1.
The earth was to bring them forth.
Yes, so do you see? So God just told the earth, and earth produced all the animals. And what is also interesting, the man was also created from earth. So it looks like animals and man are connected very closely to the earth. And do you see what happened? God cursed the earth. And because God cursed the earth, everything that is connected to the earth, like animals and man, they changed. Okay? And now, it is also very, very interesting detail. God didn't curse the people, but he cursed the earth. But the people were and animals were made of earth. And we can say that it is like, do you see, our nature became a sinful nature because we are connected to the earth. We are related to the earth. Do you understand it? Yeah. And now about the animals. And so do you see, I just share my own idea. It doesn't mean that you need to repeat it or whatever. So when I look at the difference between animals and people, so what is the difference between us, animals and people?
People have a conscience.
Okay. Animals do not have. Yeah, maybe.
I was created in the image of God.
Yes, of course. We were created in the image of God. Animals are not the image of God. It's true. Okay, so I would like to use one metaphor in order to understand, in order to explain the difference between animals and man. And this is from modern technology, from programming. Yes. So do you see? We can. Let us just imagine. Let us make a parallel between man and robots. So what is a robot? What is a robot? A robot can look like a man, and robot is programmed. He has a program, or it has a program inside, and this program just tells him or it what the robot is supposed to do. And it looks like when we look at the animals, we can see that they programmed, we call it instincts. So they have a program and they behave according to this program. Of course, in our days, like for example in circus, people try to take the animals and try to also program them to do something like to jump, to do some other things. But they cannot change very much. They cannot change very much the program that has been already installed into the animals. But when we speak about the humans, men are completely different. Because how can we explain what is going on with the people when they are born? They are born, of course, and we are born, and of course we also have a program inside every one of us. And unfortunately, this program is already broken because we have this fallen nature, broken nature. But what happened afterwards? The children studied the language. And studying the language is like a programming. So parents and some other teachers, they try to program children to behave like this or this or that. When we go to the university, we are also programmed to perform this or this functions. So it looks like man could be programmed much more than the animals could be. And what is also important, man can program himself. So we can program ourselves. Okay? And this is our responsibility to program ourselves in a good way. And unfortunately, many people program themselves in a bad way. And finally, they behave badly and they do some evil things. And this is just a metaphor. We don't need to use it. And it is just like my understanding what is the difference between us and the animals. So when I look at the world that was created in the very beginning, so I think that everything was created for man. Even all those like cockroaches and some other insects that are very annoying for us in our days. But just imagine in the Garden of Eden, they were like vacuum cleaners in our houses. So for example, if I drop a piece of bread or something else on the ground, so they can come just and remove it. So the first people should not even clean after themselves, because it was like a system that was working perfectly. But because of the sin, everything was corrupted, everything changed. And because of the sin, do you see even the relationship between animals and man were broken. Okay, but it's sorry for this discussion. Maybe it doesn't help us very much. Okay.
Prof.
Yes.
Yeah, that's very interesting that man can program himself. I like that. So can we say that man is also different from animals because man was given a ration to make choices?
Of course, yes.
All right.
Yeah, Pastor Dion, I can see your hand is raised up.
And Professor, I was just thinking about the flood. Was the flood an extension of the curse of God? Because there's a verse in that it says that my spirit does not want to strive against man. His days will only be 120. And after the flood, people lived much shorter. Was it because God didn't want to strive against man? If we actually maybe out of mercy didn't allow them to live that long? Or was it the extension of that, of the question that if you couldn't bring forth children easily, he doesn't want people to just have children easily, but he wants people to focus on bringing up their children in the right way. Do you think that the flood was an extension of the curse, or do you think it was a rectification of what happened as a response of the people?
Oh, okay, let's discuss it a little bit later when we come to the story of flood, and we will do it today. So we will discuss it, okay?
Yeah, thanks.
Just you will remind me if I forget about that. So Pastor Landiela, I also see your raised hands up. Do you want to add anything?
Yes, Prof. Could you please return to the previous slide, Prof?
Just a minute, please.
Yeah, this one. You know about the first point. The punishment of Eve was also she should be submitted to her husband. So how could you please explain about it, that it's not in fact a curse but a blessing?
Okay, so do you see, let us come back to the main theme of the Pentateuch. So do you remember it? Main theme of the Pentateuch.
The theme of the Pentateuch is partial fulfillment or non-fulfillment.
Of what?
Of God's promises.
Of the promises. And these promises have three parts. Do you remember them?
The possession,
divine human
relationship,
land,
and posterity.
Yeah.
So these three parts. And do you see all three of them are here? Be fruitful and multiplied is posterity. Yes. This is subdue the land. This is related to the land. And this is related to the relationship. And we can see that all these three parts of the blessing was distorted because of the sin. And of course, it's a very interesting statement about husband hold fast to his wife, and they shall become one flesh. And after the sin, to the woman, God says, you will have a desire. Your desire shall be contrary to your husband, but he shall rule over you. So this is a kind of not broken, but distorted relationship that now we have after the fall. So, and all these three components are the components of the original, or the components of the original blessings.
Prof, about the curses of God, the punishment.
Again, please.
About the punishment God gave to man. We have the pain of childbirth. There's also toiling when you look for food, you toil. Then the issue of death is not coming really, because even in childbirth people die. Can we consider death as a punishment also?
Yes. This is a very, very interesting question about the punishment. Do you see, it depends on how we understand the punishment. Because actually the punishment for sin is not suffering. The punishment for sin is death, according to the Bible. So in this case, we cannot understand it as a punishment. But as I told you, this is the repetition of the original blessings. Of course, these original blessings are distorted, but anyway, it is the repetition of these blessings. And maybe God provided all this in order for man to be finally saved, ultimately to be saved. So maybe for us, we need this. And this is the way how God wants to change the situation for the better. But we cannot understand it just as a punishment. Because in this case, so do you see why we cannot say that the suffering is the punishment for the sin? Because in this case, a man could redeem, or so in this case, Jesus is not needed. In this case, the doctrine of the hell is like a doctrine when people are punished because of their sins and they are suffering, but God doesn't tell that the suffering is the punishment. We cannot redeem our sins by our sufferings. The punishment or the wage of the sin is death. So if we committed a sin, we should die. And only Jesus can redeem us from this death, from this punishment. Yes, Pastor Poswa, I see your hand is raised up.
I'm so sorry, Prof, but you said something that I think is very important. I was hoping that you'd be able to go back to your lecture, but I just wanted to, to your notes. But I think that what you've just said is very important about the fact that suffering is not punishment for sin. Because a lot of people, when they are going through suffering, when they are going through hardship, one of the questions that they ask is, what have I done to deserve this punishment? It's almost like it's a punishment for something that they have done. But if this was spoken more, taught more, that actually the wages of sin is death, that's the punishment for sin, then anything else that comes, God may have providentially allowed it as a consequence of something that you have done personally, or maybe someone else has done, but God, like we read in the devotion, like you read for us in the devotion, it is meant for evil, but God means it for good. So it seems as though there is this theme in the Bible of God using the bad circumstances to work out good for both us as individuals and for the world at large. Because even when the curse is said on the ground, it says, cursed is the ground for your sake. It's almost like it is for the sake of man, it is for the benefit of man that the ground is cursed. And it's interesting to see that man could not now have the character that he needed to have in a perfect environment while under the condition of sin, and therefore he was driven out of that environment. And then it's in this environment of thorns and thistles. And when you read through the Bible, there's always this connection between, even Paul says it a lot, suffering and how suffering refines us and works on our character and helps to build up the characters that we need to have. That's why we have phrases like the refiner's fire and all of these things. So like you were saying, it is a reiteration of the blessing, but it is now under adverse conditions. But even the adverse conditions themselves, they are the best conditions for our condition after sin.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your comment. Pastor Dion, I can see that your hand is also raised up. Oh, you...
No, Professor, it was actually coming back to the question about the we were sent out of Eden because God didn't want us to live forever. And then later he brought the flood to reduce our lives even further. So I'll pick up the question a little bit later. That's why my hand was up earlier. Sorry.
Okay. Okay. And yes, Adam and Eve were exiled from, were sent away from the garden. And yeah, the same phrase I used when Abraham sends out Ishmael. The same word is used when the scapegoat is sent to the desert. Another word, garage, is an even stronger term, verse 24, a word that describes the expulsion of Cain. That's the same word Sarah uses when he calls Abraham to get rid of Hagar. Yeah, so now we can see that the first people were removed from the garden, so they do not have access to the garden. And okay, let us now, because it's already 12, almost 12, so let us have a break for 5 minutes, or maybe a little bit more, like 7 minutes, and let us come back at 12 or a little bit more, and we will continue. Okay?
All right, thank you.
Now, We finished with chapter 3, and we are moving to chapter 4. And now chapter 4 just tells us about the progression of sin, and it is clearly be observed in the story of Cain. Cain repeats the sin of his parents, but his sin is much more serious. And actually, do you remember when we spoke about the Toledot and about this original promise in Genesis 3:15 about the enmity? So we can see that this promise is actually fulfilled already in the story of Cain. And one more interesting detail that we can find in the story of Cain, that the first verse of chapter 4 actually says, and the translation is ambiguous because sometimes some scholars translate it like this, sometimes translate like a little bit different. And the Hebrew text allows two versions of the translation. Let me show it to you. So, and Adam knew Eve, his wife, and she conceived, and she gave birth to Cain, and she said, I acquired a man, and pay attention to this phrase, et Adonai. So here, everything depends how we can understand this particle at. So it could be a direct object marker, and it means that I acquire a man. And it could be just parallel with this Cain. I acquired a man, which is God, or which is the Lord. Yeah, like this. Or it could be a preposition with, and some translators translate it like this: I acquired a man with the Lord, with Adonai. So everything depends how we understand this at. So it could be a direct object marker, and it could be a preposition with. But anyway, so whatever the translation we choose, the idea is that most probably Eve, when the son was born, she hoped that this son would be the promised Messiah, the promised seed that should overtake the Satan and the serpent. But in fact, it appeared not like this, because Cain appeared to be like a seed of the Satan, because he was evil. And we can see some parallels between the sin of Cain and sin of Adam and Eve. But the Lord God called to the man and said to him, "Where are you?" So the similar question God asked Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" The Lord God took the man and put him into the Garden of Eden to walk it and keep it. And the word shamar is used. And here we find this phrase, I do not know. He answered, am I my brother's keeper, shomer? So the same shamar as it is used here. So we can find many like, not parallels, but like some echoes to the first and second and third chapters of the book of Genesis. Then the Lord God said to the woman, what is this that you have done? And the similar question the Lord asked Cain. What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And she said, I heard the sound of you in the garden, and I was afraid because I was naked and I hid myself. And very similar to the curse is very similar, which was said to the serpent. Cursed are you above all the livestocks, and above all beasts of the field, and now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. So we can see that there are many echoes, and we can even continue. So some other elements which are very common. So it is clear that Cain repeats the sin of Adam and Eve, but this sin has even more consequences. So this the continuation of these parallels. Adam and Eve were sent away from the garden to the east, and Cain goes even further to the east. He curses the ground, because of you in pain you shall eat of it all the days of your life. When you walk the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. And so we can see that the punishment of Cain, not punishment, but he was sent away even further to the east. And actually, there are many speculations about the sign that was given to Cain, and many different ideas were suggested. But now, when we speak about the story of Cain and Abel, I would like to pay your attention to another very interesting detail. So actually, do you remember what was the occupation of these two brothers? The Cain became a farmer, and the Abel became a shepherd. And when I read the story, I always ask a question. So why did Abel choose to be a shepherd? So what is the profit to be a shepherd in the world, in the first world? Yeah. So remember that at that time they didn't eat meat, they didn't eat flesh. So why did he decide to be a shepherd? Pardon?
For clothing, for
Yes.
clothes that you wear.
Yes, maybe for clothing, but
blankets and tents and stuff like that.
Maybe.
Yeah. From
yes.
chapter 3, there seems to be a sacrifice that was offered. I'm saying it seems, because it's that one is implied, it's not said explicitly.
Yeah.
So maybe it was for the purpose of making sacrifices to God.
Yes, most probably. So Abel decided to be a shepherd in order to grow the sheep, the cattle, and the cattle is needed for the sacrifices, and probably the sacrifices are needed even more than the clothing. But of course, the skins of the animals could be used as clothing. Yes, but in this case, so who was the firstborn?
Cain.
Cain, of course. Cain was the firstborn. And as we know from the further narrative of the book of Genesis, the firstborn is supposed to be a priest. Yes?
Yes.
Yes.
But it looks like in this family, in the family of Adam and Eve, the roles are changed. And Abel became a priest, and that is why he has these flocks of cattle. And Cain is not a priest because he decided to be a farmer. But it looks like Cain still wants to be a priest because he brought the sacrifice, and he brought the sacrifice from the fruits of the field, and Abel brought a sacrifice from the sheep, from the cattle. And the sacrifice of Abel was accepted, and the sacrifice of Cain was not accepted. So in this case, if it is true, my assumption, if it is true, so in this case, we can see that here again, we see this struggle for the birthright, which we can see everywhere in the book of Genesis. It comes through the entire narrative of the book of Genesis. the struggle for being the firstborn, because the firstborn is the one who actually should inherit this promise, and through his line Messiah should be born. And so if we want to reconstruct the story, the situation, what we can say that most probably what happened, Cain didn't want to be a priest, because actually, do you see, to be a priest, it means that you don't have a lot of profit for himself, so you need to have this flocks of cattle, but you don't use it for yourself. You need to have them only to do sacrifice, to bring sacrifices. But if he walks on the ground, he can profit much more than being a priest. So most probably, originally Cain didn't want to be a priest. So that is why Abel became a priest. But later on, maybe it is like a repetition of the story of Jacob and Esau. When Esau wanted to take back this birthright, maybe Cain also wanted his birthright back, and we know what happened. And it's very interesting that in the Epistle of Jude, we can find that the name of Cain is mentioned in the New Testament, and in the Epistle of Jude, the name of Cain is associated with two other heroes or characters of the Old Testament. So let me read it for you. Where is it? Yes, I found it. Woe to them, it is verse 11, for they have gone the way of Cain. And the way of Cain is associated with two other characters. Have plunged into Balaam's error for profit and have perished in Korah's rebellion. So you remember that Balaam, the problem of Balaam was that he wanted to have a profit from Balak. So he wanted to get those gifts that Balak gave him. And the problem of Korah was that he rebelled against the priests. And most probably we can see here the same situation. When Cain, first of all, he wanted to get more profit, and later on he rebelled against a priest, and Abel most probably was a priest. But what is interesting that God do not actually punish him, but he just sent him further away to the east. And of course, this statement, when Cain says that my punishment is more than a person can bear. And this verse is also very interesting because it is interpreted differently. Some people say that in this verse there is a hint to the repentance. But of course, it is not. We cannot be sure about that. So let me find it. In Genesis chapter 4, and verse 13. Vayomer Cain el Adonai, Gadol Avoni mi neso. Mi neso. Mi, it is mean, and nasa is the verb which means actually to carry. And the same verb is used to forgive. So the expression to carry the sin means to forgive the sin. And some scholars say that maybe this expression could mean that Cain says a kind of this is the repentance of Cain, because he says that my sin is more than could be pardoned, something like this. But of course, in this story, we have just a few details, and it is very difficult to interpret them. And later on, we can see that Cain built a city.
Please,
And
please.
yes,
I have
yes.
question there. But I think there, Cain was not discussing about his sin. I think was discussing about his
Consequences,
punishment.
his punishment.
Punishment, yes.
Yes, maybe, yes. So that is why, as I say, I told you that some people see here a kind of repentance, but other people cannot see any repentance in Cain. And I agree with you.
Yes.
So what happens next? Cain built a city. And I always had a question. So why did he need a city? What was the purpose to build a city? So why do people build a city? And what is the difference between city and just a village or some other settlements when people just live in tents?
A city is fortified, so it
Very
builds
well.
a strong wall.
Yes. So there is a question.
Around it.
Yeah. Why did Cain need a fortified city? It looks like he was afraid of something.
He did not trust God's promise.
Okay.
The same problem with the Tower of Babel.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't trust in God's promise.
Mm-hmm. But it looks like he was afraid of something, because when he built a city to protect himself and probably his family from somebody else.
Prof.
Yes.
Didn't he say that if anyone would find him, they would kill him? Because
yeah, surely.
and then God said, if anyone finds you and kills you, then their punishment would be sevenfold upon them. So maybe he did not trust that God would protect him from those who would kill him when
But
he
who
goes wandering.
who could kill him?
Maybe it was he was thinking Adam's other children, especially, let's say, Seth, who was just the one we know by name. Of course, Seth was not born here based on the timing of the story. Maybe his father even, I don't know.
Yeah, but I don't think that he was afraid of his father, Adam.
Also concerning, maybe he was afraid, maybe whoever shall succeed his brother Abel, like Seth may come and take a revenge.
Okay, who can make a revenge?
He was thinking maybe whoever shall succeed, brother Abel maybe can take a revenge.
Yeah.
Professor, do you think that that Abel could have had children before he was killed?
Oh no, he didn't have children. We don't know anything about his children.
It's not said, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think that he had children. So most probably he died childless, and that is why we can see that the line of the promised seed comes through Seth, not through Abel. Do you see when he is complaining, when Cain is complaining? He says, since you banishing me today from the face of the earth, and I must hide from your presence, and become a restless wanderer on the earth. Whoever finds me will kill me. And before that, he also says, the Lord says, if you walk the ground, it will never again give you its yield. You will be a restless wanderer on the earth. So do you see, again, this curse is related to the ground. And just my version, I don't want to say that it is true, like 100% true, but my understanding of this verse, so that most probably he was not afraid of the people, because at that time there was no people except his mother and father and maybe some sisters. We don't know. But maybe he was afraid of animals. And he was afraid that animals, because of the curse, and he was cursed from the ground, and animals, we see this connection. So animals are connected to the ground, people are connected to the ground, and because of that, he was afraid that somebody, like some animals, can kill him. And that is why he built a city to protect himself and his family, maybe not only from people, but also from animals. It is just an idea. I don't want you to agree with this. It is just like a possible idea that could be. Yes, Pastor Dion.
Professor,
Yes, please.
If Abel had daughters, I'm just speculating here. If he had daughters and they would maybe be vengeful in the future because of their father's death, because if Abel only had daughters, they would not have been mentioned here, and they would marry and they might be vengeful for their father's death.
Yeah, maybe. By the way, I also wanted to mention a very, very interesting story that is written in some rabbinic sources. It seems to me it is written in Bereshit Rabbah, but it is also repeated by Rashi, the Middle Age commentator. And this is a story about Lamech, the last one mentioned here in chapter 4 of the book of Genesis. And do you remember that Lamech, he was also a killer, and he even is boasting that he killed somebody. So there is a rabbinic legend about Lamech, and by the way, he is the first man who had 2 wives. And according to the legend, he was blind. But it is just a legend, and it is just a legend with some funny details. So he was blind, but he liked very much hunting. So he was a good hunter. But can you imagine a hunter who is blind? So when he went for hunting, he didn't go himself, but he went with his son, Tubal Cain. And when he was hunting, it was hunting like this. So he was pulled the arrow, had the bow and arrow, and his son Tubal Cain just showed him the direction where he should shoot. And one day, when they were hunting, accidentally they killed Cain. So they were hunting for some animals, but Cain was just passing by, and Cain was killed. And because of that, Lamech was very angry, and in his anger, he killed his son Tubal Cain. So that is why he says, for I killed a man for wounding me, a young man for striking me. So he killed a man, it means that he killed Cain, and he killed a young man, it means that he killed his son Tubal Cain. But of course, it is just a legend, and we cannot find any support in this legend in the Bible. But it was the way how the ancient rabbis tried to explain explain this idea. And it is a very tradition, very known tradition, that Lamech actually killed Cain. But of course, we do not know exactly that it really happened. Okay, any questions about that story? And if not, we can go further.
Yes, Prof.
Yes.
My concern, as the Bible stipulated, that when Cain was chased away from the Garden of Eden, he went and dwelled in the city of Nod. So my question is Cain who established the city, or Cain meant a city while being established?
Again, your question is?
My question is Cain himself built the city, or he found the city which is already built?
No, most probably he himself built a city. He was the first builder of the city.
Right.
And then Cain became the builder of a city, and he named the city Enoch after his son. So he built a city. Okay?
Professor?
Yes.
Yes, Prof.
I'm just looking at the word in verse 15. It says that it won't, God speaks, and he says it won't happen because whoever kills you will suffer 7 times the vengeance. So it seems that what Cain was afraid was a vengeance, and the only vengeance that I know of is because he killed Abel. Someone is going to avenge that he killed Abel. And so I think it's going to be someone that's related to Abel that is going to want to kill Cain out of vengeance. That's just a thought.
Yeah, maybe, yes. This is the verb nakam, which means to avenge. So, but he will be avenged. So somebody who killed Cain, if somebody kills Cain, the Cain will be avenged 7 times more. And this next statement about the sign. So he gave a sign to Cain. And there were so many different interpretations of this sign. I even don't want to go into the details because some people said that it was like a horn grew up from his forehead. Somebody said it was a dog that accompanied him. So many ideas, and we can be lost in them. Okay, can we move further? So now we are going to the story of flood, and this is an important story. Yes, when we go to the story of flood, there is a very famous controversy about who were the sons of God and who were the daughters of man. And the problem with this interpretation is that actually there is a very old tradition, and we can find this tradition already in the book of Jubilees, in the book of Enoch, and some other Second Temple literature. So this literature is dated to the Second Temple period, so it is an intertestamental period. And according to all those books, like the book of Jubilee, and you know that the book of Jubilee is called Little Genesis. So because actually the book of Jubilee is how to say, people say that it is just like an interpretation of the book of Genesis. So the same story is repeated, but some more details are given. And in this literature, we can see that the sons of God are identified as angels. So the sons of God are angels. And that is why when they read this story, they read it like this. So the angels married women, and because of this union, some very strong people were born. And these strong people are called Nephilim. But of course, we know from the book of Matthew that Jesus says that angels do not marry, and it is not applicable to angels. But anyway, this idea is very, very popular, and almost any evangelical commentary will have this idea that this actually the sons of God are the angels. But we can easily understand why this idea appeared exactly in the intertestamental period, because in this period the Jewish people were very much interested in angelology. So they wanted to know this hierarchy of angels. And when we read, for example, the book of Enoch, it gives us a lot of details. It gives us the name of the angels, describes all the hierarchy of them. And because of this interest, I think that this interpretation appeared, that the sons of God are the angels. But in fact, if we read the story of the book of Genesis, we cannot find any hint that the sons of God are the angels. But on the contrary, we have all the reasons to believe that the sons of man, or sons of God, in this case is the descendants of Adam, righteous descendants of Adam. So when we read chapter 6 of the book of Genesis, we inevitably ask ourselves a question. So chapter 4 and chapter 5 of the book of Genesis tells us about the two lines. One line are the descendants of Cain, and those people are really bad people, so they are evil people. They did all things wrong as their father Cain. But another line is the line of the righteous people, the line of Seth, and 10 descendants from Adam until Noah in this chapter 5 of the book of Genesis tells us about many generations of righteous people who lived on the earth. But what is very, very strange, so in the beginning of the 6th chapter of the book of Genesis, we can see that there is almost nobody who is righteous. But everybody who lived at that moment on earth, except Noah and his family, were bad people, evil people. So there is a question. So what did happen with this generation, not generation, but many generations of righteous people who were the descendants of Adam through Seth? And according to chapter 5, they were God's worshippers. They worshipped God. So why did they disappear? And we have only the people who were just evil. Yes, Pastor Dion.
Professor, if we look at chapter 6, verse 4, and it reads that they were giants, that the Nephil, and that word can be also referred to that they were aggressive people, they were bullies, tyrants. So they were tyrants in the earth in those days, and that was before, because now if we read the rest of the sentence, and also after those days, where they were the tyrants, the sons of God and came in contact with the daughters of men, and they bear children to them the same way that they also became tyrants. So what we see is that the intermixture of the tyrants with the sons of God became also tyrants. And that's why the whole generation disappeared. They all became tyrants. That's the way that I interpret that verse.
Yes, yes, very nice. So this is the good explanation. But let us pay attention to some details of these verses. Vayhi ki hechel ha'adam larov al pene ha'adama u vanot yuldu lachem. And it was when man, ha'adam, when man began to increase on the surface of the land, and daughters were born to them. And this we already know. And the sons of God saw the daughters of man, that they were good or beautiful, and took for them as wives from those who chose, everybody chose for himself, yes. And the Lord said, not always my spirit will dwell in the Adam, in people, because they are flesh, and let it be their days 120 years. And now we have very interesting statement. Ha nephilim hayu ba'aretz bayamim hahem, vegam achare chen asher yavo'u b'nei Elohim el banot ha'adam vayaldu lachem hema ha-hibarim asher me'olam anshe Hashem. Okay, let me try to translate it for you. Let us pay attention to this statement. Ha-nephilim hayu be'eretz bayamim hahem. So let us not translate this word. Let us just put it as it is, because in Septuagint, it is translated as gigantes. So big people, great people, something like that. So Ha-nephilim or Nephilim were in the land in those days. So there is a question, who are those Nephilim? Nephilim. And what is interesting, this Nephilim comes from the root nafal. And do you remember what nafal means?
To fall.
To fall, correct. Nafal means to fall. So we can understand that these people who are called Nephilim, they're not necessary to be giants, but they are supposed to be fallen people. Do you understand? So the fallen people were
Makes
on the
a lot
land.
of sense.
Pardon?
Makes a lot of sense.
The fallen people were in the land in those days, and also especially after the sons of man entered to the daughters, the sons of God entered to the daughters of man, and for them were born, and again, who were born to them? Ha-giborim. And who is Gibor? Do you remember who Gibor is?
Mighty man.
Mighty man. Mighty man, yes. And also this Gibor could be a reference to a soldier or military man. Military man. So as I see all this description, the beginning of chapter 6 tells us why this generation of pious people who worshipped God, disappeared completely. because in the beginning of chapter 6 we see that they are not anymore. So only Noah and his family remained, and everybody else just disappeared. So, and the Bible explains it like this. So this many pious people disappeared only because they made this mistake. And this mistake, to remember, it is described as the repetition of the sin of Adam and Eve, because they saw that they are good and they took it. So all the verbs are used which are used in the description of the sin of Eve. So in this case, so their mistake and their sin was the intermarriages. So because they married the daughters of man, and the daughters of man most probably is the reference to the line of Cain. So in this case, the next generation was already corrupted generation. So they were good people, those son of God, but when they married to the daughters of men, the next generation was already a corrupted generation. And here we have many references to the style of life that they had. Because do you see here it says that they were Giborim. And Giborim, as I told you, most probably means a military man, like a hero, a military man. So most probably this generation that lived before the flood were the people who killed each other, people who started making wars with each other. And later on, we can see that the land was full with violence. Violence, and another very interesting word, the word Hamas, which is used here, and it's also a description of the violent world that existed before the flood. And also one more characteristic that we can find, it is Anshe Hashem, people of the name. And the same characteristic is the characteristic of the builders of the Tower of Babel. So all these negative characteristics of the people which are described here. Now, let us come back to the question that Pastor Dion asked. And I can see that he raised up the hand. Do you want to add anything, Pastor Dion?
Sorry, Professor, you cut out?
I saw that you raised up a hand. So do you want to say anything?
Yes, Professor. I just wanted to ask if you think it is significant that it talks about the sons being male of God and the daughters being female of men. It's quite strange that do you think it is a significance to that, or could it have been swapped around, or yeah, I don't understand why it says the sons of God. It does mean the righteous sons versus the evil daughters, or
yeah. This is the good question. I don't have the answer to this question, but what I can see, it is everywhere in the Bible that the role of the mother is emphasized. So what I mean. So do you see? Remember that many times, especially among the kings of Judah, very often the name of the mother is mentioned. And it is clear why, because most probably the kings at that time had more than one wife. And the wife of who born the son who became the next king is mentioned. Yes, it's true, but in this way, the Bible very often emphasizes that if the mother is pious, so if the mother is faithful to God, so the son most probably will be also faithful to God. But even if the father is good, but if the mother is evil, So in this case, most probably the son will be also will go after the mother. So most probably in this case, it is emphasized that the role of women in bringing up the children. Yes, and I think that we need to speak in the churches about that, especially in the churches when if we have some marriages between church members and not church members. So we need to warn our young people about the danger of such kind of union. So maybe this young man or young woman, when she is married to an unbeliever, they will remain faithful to God. But we don't have any guarantee that their children, the next generation, will be faithful. In this case, we have a problem. Yes, and now, Pastor Dion, I would like to come back to your question about 120 years. So
before you get there, Prof.
Yes, please.
Excuse me, just a little bit, Prof. It seems like there also is another word connection besides the seeing that it is good, connecting the description of the sin of Eve, of Adam and Eve, with these people, because it says when she saw all that she saw, she took, and also here it says when they saw, they took.
They took the same word,
they
lakach.
took, and it's the same lakach. Yeah, I was just looking it up. It's the same word, lakach. So it seems like there are these verbal connections that are designed to connect the acts together. But it's like the one of Eve was the beginning, and this one was like the climax, and it ended up with the flood.
Yes, so do you see some people interpret this expression, let their days be 120 years, like God limited the lifespan of the people after the flood. And we can see that it is true that the lifespan of the people after the flood decreased very, very fast. And although Noah lived a long life, more than 900 years, but their sons and their grandsons already lived much less. And finally, we can see that the lifespan was diminished to when Moses says the days of our life like 70 years or 80 years if we are stronger. But I don't think that here we have the restriction of the lifespan of the people. Most probably here we have the reference to the 120 years of mercy when God is still waiting. God is still waiting for people to repent. But because they didn't repent, they sent the flood to the earth. Yes, and we can explain why the lifespan of the people decreased so much. Maybe most probably because of the change of the environment, and because of course we cannot say exactly, but according to the Bible we can see that during the flood the water that was in the sky poured out on the ground. And do you remember I told you that the flood is a reversal of creation? During the creation, the process of creation, and do you remember that God divided water which is above the firmament and water which is below or under the firmament. And the firmament is most probably the atmosphere. This is the water archaea, which is used in the Bible. And it looks like the first world was made, so it was like a water, how it's called?
Capsule.
Yes, above the atmosphere. So now we have just atmosphere, but before it was some other level or some other part of water above the sky, above the atmosphere. But of course, we do not know. We don't know exactly how the world was constructed before the flood. But definitely after the flood, many things changed, and we will see it later what was changed. So did I answer your question, Pastor Dion?
Yes, Professor, it wasn't really about 120 days. It was more that coming back to Eden. So God, when men sin, He sent them out of Eden. Okay, so my hypothesis is God is loving and God is merciful. So that's my hypothesis, and I want to see how that also pans out in the fact that God first sent men out of Eden so that they don't live forever, and then after that, He even reduced their time to live for even less, also because He is merciful. And then after that, even when He said, okay, for the people that do not choose me, I'm not going to allow them to live anymore. And also that is merciful, because Ellen White says that every person will, even if the ungodly, will say that God is loving and just. And so my thought then, there's maybe a question to yourself, Professor, and also maybe to anyone in the class to say is, what comes to mind if we think that God reduced the time of people and eventually does not allow the unrighteous to live, that even that is merciful?
Thank you very much for your comment. Yeah, it's really, yeah, it makes sense. Thank you. Okay, so now let us come back to our presentation. Yes, and now we have the meaning of the name Noah, and we have a kind of a wordplay with this name, because he was called the name Noah, and his name has two other words that are very similar. One word is Naham, which means actually to regret. Sometimes it's translated as a regret, or in PL it could be to bring relief. And later on, this play of word is repeated in the beginning of chapter 6, when it is said that God regretted that he created people. And also there is a connection with the word Nuh, which means rest, and Naham, as I said. And there is also connection with the word Chen, grace. So if change the order of the letters, we will have the same word. Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. So definitely we can see that the name of Noah has many connections to the story that happened. And this is we already discussed about how the sons of God took the wives among the daughters of men, and this is the repetition of the Eve's sin. And also here we can say about the corruption of the land. Many times people ask the question: so why did God destroy the entire population of the world during the flood? And these verses from 11 to 13 actually explain why it happened. And here again we have the wordplay with the word shahat. Actually, shahat has two meanings. One meaning is to corrupt or to be corrupted, and another meaning is to kill or destroy, something like that. And here it's very clearly shown that God didn't destroy something that was good, but God destroyed something that has already destroyed itself or themselves. So do you see, now the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the corrupt is this word shahat. So the earth and everybody who lived on the earth just were corrupted, and that is why here it says that the earth was filled with violence, and violence is this word Hamas. And God saw the earth, and behold, it was corrupt. And do you see, it remains the creation story. And God saw, and it was good. But now God saw, and it was corrupt. It was evil. And the same word shachat is used. For all flesh had corrupted, again, shachat, their way on the earth. And God said to Noah, I have determined to make an end of all flesh, for the earth is filled with violence through them. Behold, I will destroy. And again, the word shachat is used. So do you see, this text very clearly demonstrates that actually God destroyed only those that already was destroyed, had been destroyed. So God didn't destroy anything good, but God destroyed only those who completely corrupted their ways or corrupted themselves. So and that is why we cannot say, and I personally believe that God didn't kill or didn't destroy anybody who could be saved. And it is clearly seen, for example, on many examples. Just for instance, when God said that he will destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, and there was and he, before destruction of the Sodom and Gomorrah, took away all the people who were righteous from the city, and only after that the city was destroyed. The same is true about the destruction of Jericho. There was one person, Rahab, who was righteous in the eyes of the Lord, and God didn't destroy Jericho, but before he provided these two people who came to Jericho and secure and just provided that the life of Rahab was saved. So do you see, God will never destroy, will never kill anybody who could be saved. And also I use here the explanation with the image of God. So do you see, we said about the image of God in people, and because of the sin, the image of God is distorted, is changed. So we can say that those people who lived before the flood, they completely destroyed the image of God in themselves. And if a person stops to be the image of God, so we can say he stops to be a human, he stops to be a man, so he became like an animal. So, and we can say that something like that has happened before the flood. And what is really sad, that Jesus says that something like that will happen before the second coming. Okay, let's move on. Or if you have questions, you can ask. The story of the flood could be presented as a chiasm, and it is clear that the chiasm is here, and the climax of chiasm in verse 8, verse 1 and chapter 8, when God remembers Noah. God remembers Noah. And of course, it doesn't mean that God forgot about Noah, but this phrase, God remembers Noah, reminds about the covenant. It is the so-called covenant language. Since I don't have. Yes, here we have several instances when remember is used, like for example, Genesis 9, I will remember my covenant. It doesn't mean that God will forget, but it means that he will act as a covenant partner. The same we can see in Genesis 30, God remembered Rachel, and especially prominent is Exodus 2:24, and God heard their groanings, and God remembered his covenant with Abraham, with Isaac, and with Jacob. So do you see, this remember is the covenant language, and when God remembers, it means that he started to perform, started to act as the covenant partner. So he is the covenant partner for for Noah. Yeah. And what is also very interesting, and this is from the book of Sailhammer, Pentateuch's narrative, and Sailhammer demonstrates that actually the flood is portrayed as a purification of a house from the leprosy. Something or house or a person who was a leper, and after that he needs to perform a special ritual of purification, and the flood very much reminds this ritual. There are many parallels between the flood account and the account of the purification. And it is not a coincidence, because in the Bible leprosy is a kind of symbol, and it is a symbol of sin. So when a flood is portrayed as this ritual of purification, it looks like God purifies the land from the sin, so that to remove all the consequences of the sin and sinful people. And Noah, of course, is presented as the second Adam, and you see the story is repeated again. After he went out of the ark, Noah committed something similar to what Adam committed. And we can see from this example that this sin that Eve has done is a kind of paradigmatical sin. So the sin that is repeated again and again and again. So do you see the sons of God repeated the sin? And Noah, it looks like Noah also repeated the sin of the first people. And that is why Noah became a new Adam. Adam ate from the fruit and Noah drank of the wine. Adam became naked because of the sin, and Noah became naked. Adam had a problem with the children when one son killed another son. And again, we have a problem with the children in the account of Noah. And now I would like to discuss very briefly the sin of Ham, and this is the chapter 9 of the book of Genesis. And there are several versions of this, or several explanations of this sin. The first one is the most literal, and this most literal interpretation says that actually the sin was that Ham was mocking at his father when he saw him naked. And voyeurism means actually watching somebody else who is naked. Second interpretation of the sin of Ham is that what Ham did, he made a castration of his father. So the problem of the first interpretation is that it is not clear why, because of the sin of Ham, Canaan was cursed, because Canaan was the son of Ham. So we know from the Bible that the children are not punished for the sins of their fathers, but it looks like because of the sin of Ham, his son, the grandson of Noah, was cursed. The second interpretation tries to explain this problem. You can see that Noah had only 3 sons. Noah had only 3 sons, and after the flood, he lived for 400 years, or 300 years, I don't remember. Okay, so he lived a long life. So most probably he could have some more sons, but we don't know about any other sons of Noah. And so the idea is that Ham castrated his father, and that is why he was not able to have more sons, more children. And that is why Noah, when he understood what happened to him, he cursed the 4th son of Ham, because Ham had several sons, and Canaan was the 4th one. But of course, this interpretation is also very weak because it doesn't explain why did Ham committed such kind of action. Why did he castrated his father? One more interpretation is that the sin of Ham was a homosexual act. So why do we have this interpretation? Because the expression to open the nakedness or to see the nakedness is an euphemism, and this euphemism actually means some sexual relationship. So in the Bible, in the chapter 9, we can see that actually Ham saw the nakedness of his father. And because in the Bible, this expression is a kind of euphemism indicating to sexual relationship, some people say that it is a homosexual act. And this interpretation is quite popular. And the next interpretation, that this is an incest. And why do we have this interpretation is because in the Bible there is an expression in the book of Leviticus, yes, in the book of Leviticus, the one who opens the nakedness of a sister, for example, he opens the nakedness of his father. The one who opens the nakedness of the mother, he opens the nakedness of his father. So in this case, we can restore the situation like this. We know that Ham was not the firstborn, but he actually most probably wanted to be the firstborn, and he wanted to get this birthright somehow. And in the Bible, we can find it very often, the idea that if somebody took a wife of somebody else, so it means that he is like higher, he takes a more elevated position in the society than previous man. So, for example, do you remember when Absalom was fighting with his father David, and David went away from Jerusalem, but he was not able to take all his wives and all his concubines, all his wives. So what happened? Ahithophel, the wise man, gave an advice to Absalom to make a tent and to pitch a tent at the roof of the palace or the roof of the house that everybody can see it, and to enter into the bedroom of his father, so to have this sexual relationship with the wives of his father. So it was done just to show, to demonstrate, and not because of the lust or because of something like this, but in order to demonstrate that Absalom is higher than his father. So what the fourth interpretation actually says that what happened when Noah was drunk, his son Ham just slept with his mother, and because of this Canaan was born. So Canaan was a son of Ham with his own mother. So when Noah learned about that, so he cursed Canaan. So he just showed that you wanted to become to get this blessing of the birthright, but instead of that, you'll get a curse. Okay, so just to finish our class for today, because our time is over, I want to tell you that there is no like one interpretation which is better than other, because all four interpretations have their own weaknesses. For example, it is not clear how when the Japhet and Shem knew about that, so why did they cover the nakedness of the father? So it looks like it is more like a literal interpretation or literal meaning of this account. So every of these interpretations have their own weaknesses. And I remember a couple of years ago in our magazine, Ministry, there was on the last page, there was hard saying of the Bible, and Angel Rodriguez answered some of the questions that were asked. And there was a question about the sin of Ham. And Angel Rodriguez supported the first interpretation, voyeurism. So he didn't go to the fourth interpretation. A long time ago, I remember I read another article written by Catholic scholars, two Catholic scholars in Catholic Biblical Quarterly, and those scholars actually argued for the fourth interpretation. I also heard somebody else argued for the third or second interpretation. So there are many interpretations of this passage. So, but what I would like to tell you, I would like to warn you: don't tell this in the churches. Just if you ask, you should know there are several interpretations of this event, but don't try to speak about this in the churches. Okay. So, do you have any questions?
Mine is a silly question, Prof. What is your position and why?
I'm more inclined to the fourth interpretation, because as for me it's more logical than all of them, or all others. But I don't want to insist that this interpretation is correct. I can give you an article written by these two scholars in the Catholic Biblical Quarterly, and they are very convincingly demonstrate that it is most probably the best interpretation of the story. But as I told you, every interpretation has the weaknesses. If you take yes.
No, okay, maybe it's in the article, but now how do you deal with how the other two sons walked backwards so that they don't see their father's
maybe we can just interpret it literally. So they just came and covered. As we understand, most probably Noah and his wife were in the tent together. And while Noah was drunk and he didn't understand anything, Ham could committed this sin. And after that, two sons just in a reverent attitude, they just covered literally, and they even didn't want to look at it. Yes, but as I told you, I don't want to insist on one interpretation. I just told you about different approaches to this story. Okay.